The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to Useful Social Media's webinar on social media compliance and risk management. Over the next 50 minutes we'll be discussing how to achieve effective and efficient social compliance whilst monitoring and mitigating risk. My name is Jack Edgar. I'm the Project Director here at Useful Social Media and I'll be hosting today's webinar. And the webinar actually forms part of the agenda for this year's Corporate Social Media Summit taking place in New York on June the 15th and 16th. Both Laurie and Lisa will be there speaking alongside 40 senior executives from the world's most social brands. Now, before we get started with today's discussion, I just want to remind you that we are recording the webinar, so everyone will receive the audio recordings early next week. The webinar is also very much interactive, so we have several anonymous polls taking place throughout the discussion, so please do vote and get involved. I also urge you to type in your own questions. That would be into the question box on the right-hand side. Again, these are very much anonymous, so we can ensure that the insight is indeed tailored to your challenges and your priorities. I'll be incorporating these into the discussion as we go. We're also using the hashtag CSMNY, which you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. So again, any questions or additional thoughts, please do share them. Now, joining us today, I should say, I'm delighted to introduce firstly Laurie Hale, who's the VP, Social Media Compliance Officer at Bank of the West, Rohit Valia, who's the CEO of Cafyne, and Lisa Melton, the Assistant Vice President of Marketing at Amica Mutual Insurance. Welcome to each of you. Now, before we get started with the discussion and indeed our first poll, I just want to let each of our speakers introduce themselves, just to shed a little bit more insight and light onto their respective roles and respective companies. So, Laurie, I'm going to come to you first.
Thank you, Jack. I'm glad to be here. Yes, I'm the Senior Corporate Compliance Officer at Bank of the West, and I'm based in San Francisco. In this role, along with my other business partners, I identify how laws and regulations are applicable and the impact that they have at a corporate and group level at the bank related to the bank's social media activity. And so I also develop policies and procedures that test in our testing of our controls and help in the development of employee training. Before joining Bank of the West, I was with Wells Fargo, where I served as their primary enterprise risk consultant on enterprise social media strategies and activities. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Laurie. And I'm coming over to you, Rohit. If you could give us a brief overview similar to Laurie, that would be great.
Thanks, Jack. Cafyne is based in Silicon Valley. I'm the CEO of Cafyne Inc. So Cafyne provides a SaaS platform to proactively manage social conversations for better social risk management, and it's basically founded on the principles that the adoption of social media is increasing in the enterprise, and its platform allows enterprises to better manage the risk, get a handle on the overall company sentiment, the social equity, which allows you to gauge the influence your employees have in the social sphere, as well as get a handle to understand the compliance that they are adhering to in their organizations. So with that, I look forward to this webinar and get the thoughts of the co-panelists.
Thanks very much, Rohit. And finally, Lisa, over to you. I'd love if you could introduce yourself, of course.
Oh, good morning, everyone, or maybe good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa Melton. I'm an Assistant Vice President with Amica Insurance Company. Just to give a little bit of background about Amica, many of you may not be familiar with us, but we are the oldest mutual insurer of automobiles in the country. We've been in business for 108 years. We write all personal lines for individuals and their families, and I actually oversee our social media efforts here at Amica. So I work with a terrific team that puts forth all of our content and connects with customers and engages. But I also have really strong relationships within the organization to manage our risk and work on our compliance issues. So I'm very happy to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Lisa. Now, the issue of social media compliance is obviously a challenging one for many companies. That's, of course, why you're all here. And in my conversations with many senior executives in the build-up to the webinar, one thing that I kept hearing is the desire really for their companies to fully embrace compliance, not just accept it, sometimes begrudgingly. So this actually forms the basis of our first poll. You can only select one answer, and I'll give you around about 15 seconds to do so. And as I say, it's very similar to what I just asked. So do you feel that your company has effectively embraced social media compliance? Do you feel that your company has effectively embraced social media compliance? You can either select yes or no. We're starting off with relatively simple, nice yes and no answer. Do you feel that your company has effectively embraced social media compliance? I'll just give you another 5 seconds to vote if you could. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much for all those who voted. That's fantastic. And you should have the poll results coming up on your screen now. Now, interestingly, it's relatively even. So we have around about 60% saying yes, so a majority saying they have indeed effectively embraced social media compliance, whereas 40% are saying that is something still yet to happen. Laurie, coming to you first, perhaps firstly you could give us your thoughts on these results. I'm not sure if they surprise you, but also if you could outline what embracing social media compliance means to you.
Well, I'm happy to see the results, and I wonder how many people are in compliance roles that are listening to the call. But to me, embracing social media compliance means that, you know, when everybody owns their role in managing risk, then compliance tends to feel a little less like a relative that comes to visit for 3 weeks just when you're heading out the door on vacation. And more like a friend who helped you pack what you need to really have a good time. And I think, you know, that integration is really important. And the motivation is to, you know, to meet business goals, to strengthen, whether that's to strengthen the brand, you know, whatever the desired outcomes may be, and to do so with minimal fallout and, you know, and less of a concern once your content is out there. So I think it's really about everybody having having skin in the game and owning their role in managing risk.
Fantastic. And Rohit, just come over to you. So really, in terms of your experience and, of course, your experience with the many brands that you work with, what does embracing social media compliance mean to you? And if you could kind of touch upon really what the motivation behind embracing compliance is.
Yeah, Jack. So I think what we see is that, especially, and I'll speak from the enterprise perspective, when we look at the fact that social media is, of course, going to have a different level of engagement based on the industry you're in. So for Laurie's industry, being financial services, is much more heavily regulated. So compliance takes on a different meaning. But in terms of managing the risk that stems from social media, it does go towards, you know, everybody having skin in the game, as Laurie said. But in addition, it's also about empowering the employees to be able to engage safely in social media. And for that, that requires that there be the training programs put in place so that employees are aware of what their duties are with respect to social media, or obligations are with respect to protecting the reputation of the organization. So to kind of round it out, I think it's to bring it together with the employees participating in social media, but the company also providing them the right guidelines and tools to make sure that's happening all around.
Mm. And certainly them actually empowering your employees in a safe way is something which is many people have actually emailed questions in beforehand. So we're looking forward to going into that in a little bit more detail. And you mentioned, of course, the importance of having a framework in place. And just coming over to you, Lisa, you know, to what extent does Amica actually have an established framework for social media compliance?
I think, again, we're a highly regulated industry as well, so we have a very established framework. And one of the things I think that we have a little bit of a benefit of, is I spent the majority of my career at Amica on the operations side. So I worked within the regulatory frameworks. I understand kind of the whole compliance aspect and all the rules and regulations. So moving over to social was a relatively easy transition, and understanding, okay, here's what we can do, what we can't do, here's what we can say, what we can't say, here are the kind of the real rules and understanding of the nature of our business. So I think really gaining that education is invaluable, because I think for all of us, the last thing that we would want to do is risk our brands in any way. So there's a lot of knowledge and understanding. We have kind of playbooks that we go by to ensure that we're doing what we need to do, listening strategies, customer privacy, all that sort of thing. We try to make sure that everyone understands what the ground rules are in order to make sure that we're effectively managing that risk and ensure that we're in compliance.
And just to highlight, we've got a few questions coming through the chat box, which is fantastic. So if you, please, if you have any questions, keep throwing them in. And actually, one of the questions that's just come through, and I'm going to come back to you, Laurie, and it's related specifically to actually establishing a framework for social media compliance. What are those first initial steps? So if you are a company kind of first venturing into social media, and of course compliance is a key issue for you, what are the first steps a company can take to developing a sound framework upon which they can build?
Sure. So, there's a few, I think, probably critical steps that any company could take. And one of them, I think, first that's important is really getting clear on what the social strategy is, and what are those activities? What does that look like? And how far-reaching is it across the organization? How are these strategies and activities being executed? Who are the partners? Who are those key stakeholders that are involved in this, and what roles do they serve? And when you risk assess, you're considering those things as well as what existing controls you have in place, external factors, as we mentioned, such as the regulatory environment and policies and so forth, to help you identify gaps. And then the gaps really need to be prioritized. And I think there is a logical flow to it if you're first starting out. And I also would say that there's likely other aspects of the business that undergo this process. So to the degree that you're able to, that framework should be considered where it works elsewhere in the company. But that could be a good starting point.
Fantastic. And coming over to you, Rohit, was there anything that you'd like to add on that in terms of actually laying the right foundations and those kind of initial first steps that one can take?
Yeah, I mean, Jack, when we kind of look at, there's actually specific guidelines for how to go about doing it. The first of those came about through the FFIEC regulatory guidance, which quite clearly states that organizations should have a governance structure with clear roles and responsibilities, policies and procedures regarding the use of the social media, and also to ensure that all your current and applicable consumer protection laws, etc., are adhered to on social media just as any other avenue that you might be using. And then also being very clear in terms of an employee training program that allows the institution to work through what are the potential pitfalls of social media for the organization. But once all that is put in place, a very key step is to also have an oversight process for monitoring the information and being able to react to it, because it's not just about collecting this information, because there are certain requirements in terms of when a certain post is made against or for your product, that you're responding to it in a timely manner. So having that monitoring framework in place is equally important. And then, of course, being able to organize the information and being able to present it out for the audit and compliance functions, and to be able to report that out to your senior management. So I think that with that kind of 7-step type of process, you have what seems onerous, but will hold you in good stead if you put that process in place and use the right tools to be able to gather that information and be able to present it when needed.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rohit. And actually, Lisa, I mean, both Laurie and Rohit mentioned a couple of kind of key challenges that you can sometimes face when establishing this initial framework and then taking compliance to the next level. In your experience at Amica, really, what was one of the biggest or perhaps most common challenges that you faced and that you know that other companies perhaps face when trying to establish this kind of framework and these kind of procedures?
I think one of the initial things was really related to making sure the folks who are working in social understand the rules and regulations. You know, that's always, and as Rohit mentioned, employee training is incredibly important and really kind of crucial to the overall brand protection and risk mitigation piece. So I think, you know, just getting everybody on board and really trying to understand what we can and we can't do. But I also think that there's always a challenge of keeping up with changing regulations as well. You know, there's new things that come on board for us. There's a lot of state regulations we have to be sure that we're monitoring. But also things like FTC guidelines that come down that might change the way we're doing things. It's just creating that awareness and being mindful of the fact that even though things are good and everything's in a good place, something could change that could change the way we do something. So it's a good thing to be informed, and it's certainly something that keeps us on our toes. But if it's managed properly and effectively, you know, it's really just the nature of doing business in social.
Most definitely. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges in the social space is keeping up with the constantly moving goalposts. And when you have, I suppose, a constantly changing regulatory environment as well, it adds another piece to that pie. And actually, one of the questions that's just come through, and I'm just going to come to you, Laurie, on this one before we move on to our second poll. Do you think that regulation will continue to proliferate? An example is, for example, you know, in Canada, it's just reduced anti-spam laws. You know, will compliance resources impact on the bottom line of your business, and do you think of businesses as a whole?
Absolutely. I certainly don't. I think that's not unique to any financial industry or a regulated industry. I think that you know, we're continually in the process, and this is what Lisa was speaking about, is, you know, there are changing regulations, and you know, that changes the way that we perceive risks organizationally. Some risks that might have surfaced as one of the greatest ones might then change positions with something else, and that could be driven by many things: strengthening of controls, changes in regulations, a number of things, or activities that the financial institution engages with. And one of the things that I wanted to just mention as we were talking about this and kind of what kind of challenges companies can face when they establish a framework for compliance around social is that social is typically, not exclusively, but typically a business within a business, and could reside in a lot of different places and organizations. It could be part of the marketing group. It could be part of the digital group or corporate communications. And you know, compliance frameworks are often in place in other areas, and the challenge really is true for everybody, is that social is an equal opportunity, you know, kind of a experience across the enterprise. It impacts every business, every employee, so you always need to be thinking about the different areas of impact, all the decision and connection points, and that typically, you know, would come out of the gap analysis that you would conduct. So.
Fantastic, thanks very much. And it's a nice segue talking about, of course, the impact that it can have on not only your bottom line, but of course your social strategy first and foremost. And that brings us to our second poll, and it's trying to gauge the extent to which the audience feels that social media regulation and compliance actually restricts their social media strategy. Once again, you can only choose one answer, and we have 4 options this time. And the question is, to what extent do you feel that social media regulation and compliance restricts your social media strategy? To what extent do you feel that social media regulation and compliance restricts your social media strategy? A, not at all. B, not very much. C, to a reasonable extent. Or D, very much so. It certainly does restrict what you're able to do with regards to your social media efforts. I'll just give you another 5 seconds to finish voting. Thank you once again for all those getting involved in the poll, and please, we are having questions coming in thick and fast. I'm delighted that we're able to be integrating them in, so any questions that you'd like to ask, do not sit there in silence. Please put them through the chat box. Once again, they are, of course, anonymous as well. Thank you to all those who voted. You should have the results coming up now. So we have very, very few stating that, of course, the extent to which they feel that social media regulation and compliance restricts their social media strategy. Only 6% say not at all, and again, no one is saying very much so, but there's a big band kind of between the not very much and of course, the winner to a reasonable extent. Firstly, coming to you, Rohit, I mean, when it comes to your marketing strategy, often people consider compliance to be merely restricting one social strategy and as if a kind of straitjacket. I mean, how do you bring compliance into the mix whilst maintaining an effective and an efficient marketing program and social program?
Yeah, so, you know, one of the things about social, of course, when we think of marketing, we think of the company's corporate Twitter handle. At Cafyne, we certainly believe that social is more effective when it's broader. Now, of course, with the industry that you're in and the regulations that might be there, there's a certain amount of onus on you to be able to track everything that's being done, and so you may be restricted to trying to just use the official corporate marketing handles. But firstly, you know, to really be effective with social, it needs to be as organic and authentic as you can make it, because that's really why people are following you, because they want to kind of get things as they happen and see them as transparently as possible. So to really be able to leverage social effectively, you want to have the ability to amplify your message to whatever channels possible. Your employees are definitely one of your biggest assets and brand ambassadors, and if they can participate, that is very much desired. But on the other hand, since you need to manage the risk, you do need to put in place, you know, as we talked about that governance structure, that they are trained on what can and cannot be done on social media, and two, if there are tools that you can use that can keep the things within the guardrails of what is acceptable, then that will that much help your program and also amplify your message in the direction that you want it to go. And so that's certainly some of the things that you want to think about, is how do you craft a program where there are either more employee ambassadors and you can maybe tap into them, those influencers, recognizing who they are, and then also have that training and risk management program so that you can archive and collect all of their data as well.
So once again, making sure that the guidelines and the parameters are clear across the company from the bottom up, really. And again, we will come to that in a little bit more detail in a short while. I mean, one of the things actually coming up on the chat box is actually looking at the kind of level of review for content and pushing out content on social media. And I know from many conversations, people kind of struggle often with actually knowing how much what is considered an appropriate level of review when coming to content and social activity. So coming to you, Laurie, I mean, often there is a tendency for companies to perhaps over-engineer this. I mean, what does an appropriate level of review of content look like? And for you at Bank of the West, and also your experience at numerous other companies, you know, who should be doing this review, and what's the most, I suppose, efficient and effective way of entering into this process?
So I think that's there's a couple of things that would influence this. I think we have to always keep in mind that businesses manage risk every day. It's not new. Social didn't introduce new. I mean, it introduced new risk, but it didn't introduce risk to a business. And you can easily over-engineer. So knowing your business appetite for risk is important. But obviously, it's just as important to know which regulations, policies, or other factors cannot, you know, be compromised. Where are those hard lines? But you may have reoccurring campaigns that are launched on social, which allow for a more expedited review, providing you have a very strong first line of defense, and I think that's also important. So appropriate levels of review could vary, but if you have a very, very strong first line of defense and content sort of coming to you a little more clean, and it's discussed earlier on as part of the overall campaign, that's often very helpful. You know, this and having those good controls in place. So this may fall within, expedited reviews may fall within your business's level of acceptable risk, potentially. In terms of who reviews what, you know, content and social activity, you know, reviews fall into different buckets. So, and they warrant different reviewers, and some of them take a little longer than others because they need to maybe go through, you know, legal review, HR review. Other groups might need to be weighing in, but it's shepherding that process in a smooth and efficient way, and getting there, I think, is very instrumental.
Fantastic. And actually, whilst we're on the issue of, you know, that kind of risk management side and who you actually consider as the first line of defense, I mean, who is it for you, Laurie? And you know, is it compliance? I mean, is it the people creating the content? I suppose, who is it for you, and who do you believe it should be?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to embracing social media compliance. I think that the first line of defense is anybody who certainly touches content, or there are third-party service providers. They are, you know, product developers, and you know, I might have high aspirations, but I would think that when people do design and consider risk as part of this, you know, as part of getting that out the door, then yeah, I think that first line of defense is really that, you know, very, very broad base of employees, as well as, like I said, third-party service providers potentially before it hits compliance review.
Fantastic. And actually, just coming back to this issue of review, and we will kind of again look at the kind of risk management side in a little bit more detail. I mean, a lot of companies are looking for their kind of Oreo Super Bowl moment, but if you have numerous different levels of review that you have to go through before you can tweet something as real time as that, then obviously it slows up the process. So I'm interested, and coming over to you, Laurie. I mean, how have Amica really kind of built in efficiencies into your review process and your overall compliance process to make sure that, I suppose, you are as real time as you possibly can be?
Well, I think for us it's a lot about communication, and it's so interesting that, you know, as social practitioners, we like to talk about having conversations with folks, and it's about engaging. And I think even as an organization, it's ensuring that we're communicating with people ahead of time. So I think, you know, Laurie did a really nice job of kind of highlighting the fact that it really is kind of dependent on what the content is and the campaign is with regard to who sees it and how many levels. But I also think kind of sitting down with everyone who needs to be involved, helping them understand your social strategy, helping them understand your goals, understanding what some of their challenges are. I think that communication ahead of time can always help in ensuring that everyone's on the same page, people know what's expected, ensuring that, you know, someone's maybe not viewing, or someone is a social practitioner may not be viewing compliance as kind of a negative, but just an understanding of this is the way we have to do things. So I think in kind of the Oreo moment, I would imagine that if that were us, we would have everyone that we would need sitting at the table in a war room trying to craft out whatever that message would be to ensure that that got out real time. But I do think a lot of the success in compliance and risk management focuses on communication, and it's so interesting how that seems to come back over and over again, no matter what you do in business. So.
It's exactly making sure everyone is indeed on the same page, and first and foremost, and then kind of easing those internal communications and breaking down some of those traditional silos, which of course can get in the way. Coming to you, Rohit, I mean, actually developing sound internal compliance policies and processes across your enterprise can be difficult. I mean, numerous people have highlighted it, and they still are on the chat box. How can companies go about setting employee guidelines with regards to their social media usage? I mean, especially when it comes to companies who have global operations. I mean, how can they make sure that they're going about that all their employees know what the kind of parameters are, and indeed that they are adhered to?
So the practicality of it is, you know, there are a lot of guidelines and policies that employees have to adhere to. So when it comes to social media, it's quite easy that it gets buried under all of the other, ethics and other compliance types of policies that employees know they have to follow. And so many large organizations obviously have annual programs and certifications that the employees have to do. And so I think social will probably find its mark in those certifications that employees have to go through. But all said and done, it's still the onus is on the organization to be able to effectively monitor that those policies are being adhered to. And that's really where Cafyne comes in, because Cafyne is designed with the notion that while social is mostly going to be free of error and we hope impactful and positive for the organization, there is always that risk. And by being able to encode every organization's social policy into its rule engine, a real-time rule engine, we can monitor and alert when there are any infractions, if any. So I think it's a combination, as we previously said, about an effective training program, but then also putting the governance structure, the tools to be able to capture what's needed.
Fantastic. And I'd actually just like to bring Laurie in on this specific issue. We've just had a question come through, which just asks, do you have any best practices or recommendations on how to, going about, Rohit just touched on it perfectly, how to monitor adherence with social media policies. So in particular, how to identify and action employees using social media for business purposes without having received the required authorizations.
So that does get pretty tricky, because there are labor laws, and you need to be careful of not just what you're monitoring, but also what you're doing with that information, right? But I would first, I guess I would say, and just to kind of circle back on the policy piece, policies need to make sense, and they're, they need to be able to be complied with, and they need to be tested against. And I think, you need policies, but you want your employees and third-party service providers to know what they mean, and that's, where are the blurred lines, what's permissible and what's not, and who they can go to for these tools and help and answers and stuff. And I think, showing continual examples of how, we talked a little bit about advocacy, employee advocacy on social. Listening programs enable you to pick up mentions of, across all social and web properties, but what do you do with that information is just as important with ensuring that there's compliance with various regs and regulations and with policies. I think that's not as, well, it is a challenge, certainly on non-branded sites, or it can be. I think that it's equally important to consider what you do with that information and how it's used, what happens to the employees and so forth. So yeah, we employ listening and monitoring programs that enable us to pretty quickly identify if there's non-adherence with policies and have a clear escalation path for those.
Thanks, Laurie. And we're actually going to kind of move into a slightly deeper focus on risk management. Obviously, risk management, it plays a huge role in protecting your social brand. And really, from the conversations I've had, many have kind of recommended that I suppose that initial stage needs to be actually conducting a risk assessment of your entire business to be able to identify the biggest potential and, of course, current issues for you. Coming to you, Lisa, I mean, is this something which you have indeed done, and if so, how would you recommend a company goes about doing this? Because it seems a relatively comprehensive thing to do.
Yes, and I think Laurie kind of set it up very nicely, and this is actually one of my favorite parts of kind of the social compliance world, is that I think people understand that there's risk associated with being in social and being active in social, and as Laurie mentioned earlier, it's kind of understanding what your appetite is for that. But I also think there's such an amazing opportunity for social to help with risk management. And one of the ways that we've gone about this is really through our listening strategy. So monitoring what's being said about us, understanding what the sentiment is on our brand. We even, with our listening platform, we're able to tag topics of conversation, you know, what's happening, what it's related to, so that we can really understand and get a good framework of how our brand is viewed externally. And because we're listening all the time, it really allows us to see some early warning signs of anything that might be emerging from a risk perspective. But there's also so many opportunities in social to understand what the risk is and understand what's being said, but also maybe to correct some inaccuracies should something happen and provide a more accurate set of information. So I do think listening is just such an important part of an overall listening strategy and overall risk management strategy. And I think it really is important to have the right tools to do that as well. So that's certainly one way that we're constantly monitoring what the perception externally is of our brand. That really helps us allow us identify trending and really get a good sense of what people are saying about us.
As you say, putting your fingers in your ears is certainly not going to help anyone. There isn't a lot of conversation about your brand going on out there. It seems silly not to be part of that, and at least trying to be contribute and kind of sculpt that conversation as well. Coming over to you, Rohit, I mean, in terms of this initial stage of actually conducting a risk assessment of your business and going about identifying what perhaps are the biggest and potential issues for you that could escalate. I mean, how have you experienced companies go about doing this, and what are the most effective ways of doing so?
So when it comes to social risk, so certainly as Lisa pointed out, listening to the brand sentiment is sometimes an early warning indicator of what else might be percolating out there. But with Cafyne, we focus very clearly on the risk from employee use of social media. And with our tools, we're able to create a person profile of their use of social media, and that too without obviously violating any of the privacy disclosures that employees need to go through, and using that to kind of implement the social media guidelines for the organization, creating the alerts, you know. So by using those techniques, we kind of focus on the risk from the employee use of social media, mostly because, you know, so let's say as an example, and I was to say like Apple, you know, everybody loves Apple, and they, you know, that they keep their launches fairly, you know, to themselves till the very date. But however, the market always has rumors of things that might be planned by Apple in the upcoming launch. And of course, you know, anybody out there can start talking about the launch of a favorite new Apple gadget, but it has no credence because nobody in the organization has ever mentioned it. However, if an employee was to use that phrase or word or color in their social media posts, suddenly it gives it a lot more credibility. And so with Cafyne, we essentially focus in on ensuring that the risk that you have is a lot greater when your employees endorse something versus what the market might be saying. So that's an angle that I think from a risk perspective, it is very valuable.
And I think, as you kind of alluded to, Rohit, I mean, it's not just about identifying what your biggest external risks are, but also internally as well. But also it's important to establish what you consider an acceptable level of risk. I mean, certainly, I'm going to come to you, Laurie, on this. I mean, you certainly can't just put the whole company on lockdown. You know, you have to be able to throw an element of caution to the wind. How, I suppose, the question is how do companies go about drawing the line and actually saying, well, this is indeed an acceptable level of risk, however, this indeed is not?
Well, that's a great question. You know, social has done a really great job of, I think, you know, asking companies to look at their risk appetite in very new ways, and because of its nature, and yet, you must. So I think that, while I think talking about acceptable levels of risk should be occurring at the strategic level and into the activities level, so that it's not each time feeling like, and which doesn't mean it will never happen, but it will feel less like each time something is brought forward, it's like, oh no, we can't do that. When that early engagement where it really matters, and people share that common understanding, and I'm not really trying to skirt this issue, but I don't think there's a real hard answer, but I think where those discussions should happen is early on. And like I said, that kind of helps to prevent those 11th hour, the brakes being slammed on, and causes a lot of surprise and a lot of anxiety. So I think the level of acceptable risk can and often can change based on the controls, the various factors. But again, I think early on, so that people understand even at a baseline what that is, enables it to feel like there's a way to get to yes, potentially. Which is the goal. I mean, which should be everybody's goal, is that, that should be the common goal. It's like just saying no for no's sake because it feels risky and it's unfounded is also pretty dangerous. And I think that, as long as there's dialogue, and I think, the other speakers have mentioned it too, that communication is so critical with partners.
Exactly, and as you rightly pointed out, just saying everything is a potential risk. Therefore, it would lead to a very kind of boring strategy as a whole, and in that in itself is very risky. And just throwing that one over to you, Lisa. I mean, obviously you're working in a highly regulated industry. I mean, how do you and the company as a whole go about actually measuring what is a kind of acceptable level of risk when it comes to not only kind of what your employees can share about the brand externally, but also the brand itself?
You're throwing a lot of hard questions out here, Jack.
Apologies, I know this is a big one for a Thursday morning.
I know. It's a tough thing to answer. I think, as Lori mentioned, it's just kind of fleshing it out in a lot of communication. But, someone once said to me, and believe me, I'm not a sports person. I don't really follow sports, but it's something related to the fact that you don't score a touchdown by running down the middle of the field. So when you think about compliance, it's kind of like you're in the middle of the road. You score it by kind of going down the sidelines and running to the goal down the sidelines. And it is that almost sideline view of how far is everyone comfortable going and having those conversations in order to get that touchdown, and playing along the sidelines but not quite getting out of bounds too often. And I do think that really, it's almost at times a little bit of a gut check to ensure that you're where you need to be, but it is a lot about ensuring that it's not just what you're doing in social, but if it's relating to anything else within the organization, making sure that everybody's comfortable with that. So I think a lot of brands these days are very active in social, and it's really become part of an overall business strategy. It's social business, not necessarily social media. So the last thing I know for us that we would want to do is take a little bit too much of a risk and then have others within the organization view it as a negative. So we try to kind of skirt the sidelines a bit, but still maintain our boundaries to ensure that we're pushing, we're doing things not just status quo all the time, but staying within the guidelines of what we need to be doing. It's a tough question. And I definitely think it speaks to the communication aspect of the comfort level and ensuring everybody's agreeing with that strategy.
And that was a very good answer for such a difficult question, and I especially like the sports analogy. I think that worked very well, especially for someone who admittedly, you said that you're not into sports, but actually, and as we're kind of moving towards our the kind of final part of the webinar, Rohit, I'd love to come over to you. And I mean, we mentioned the importance of social listening, both externally and, of course, internally as well, making sure that you are aware of any breaches in compliance from your employees. And really, that's ultimately with the aim of identifying a particular issue before it escalates. How can companies go about monitoring not only internally but also externally their community to make sure that they are one step ahead of the conversation and able to spot potential threats? And then, of course, once you are able to identify that, how can you kind of limit the damage that it can be done and kind of lock it down at that particular stage?
Right. So that's the way, I mean, we envision organizations using social, and especially with the adoption of social growing at such a rapid pace, is social, as in fact Lisa mentioned, isn't just social media, it's a business. And it's an integral part of your business. And I think to kind of keep social away from the maximum exposure would be doing disservice to the organization. And by that I mean social isn't just for some of the authorized users. I mean, your employees are doing social. They might not have the company handle, but it's very much understood that any employees can subject an institution to reputational risk. Because every enterprise should be aware that employee communications, even personal ones, on social media will be construed and can be construed by consumers as official policies. So if you have these policies in place, you want to kind of make sure your employees, while they're participating, you also are aware that whatever they're saying and doing, which you may not be aware of, the consumers out there think they are endorsed by you in some ways, because just by notating that they work for your organization, they become ambassadors of your brand. So why not harness them? Why not actually get them in your program, and then when you get them in the program, it's when they're part of your program, you have a better chance of understanding what they're talking about and to be able to guide them better, etc. So in terms of like as these identification of these threats, so the point I'm trying to make is that by letting your, because a lot of the risks are not going to stem from your official use, because in marketing, Lisa is very aware of, all the regulations and what can be said and what can't be said, who the stakeholders are, who she needs to get, involved up front. But the risk many times can stem from people who are kind of on the periphery and are still employees of the organization and may make a casual comment about something that, had they been better involved in the process, would know better. So I think that itself is one of the things that can help spot these potential threats, is to engage your ambassadors into your program and then be able to monitor their activity. And by them participating, they'll become more voluntary participants into your monitoring program as well. But the other incentive is they get recognized for the contribution that they might be making to your company's brand, because let's recognize they're helping your brand by doing and chatting about stuff that relates to work, promoting your organization, and they get recognized for that. And so by being more involved, you can actually have a better handle on it, and then we can also have processes in place to, and certainly with Cafyne we can, where if they use the tool that's been made available to the organization for posting their social content, it can be reviewed before it goes out, if it's anything related to their business. So I think to potentially stop these things, you need to obviously put in place programs that will help you identify these things beforehand through training and these tools. But then when an incident does happen, what do you do? Well, there I think it comes to an organization showing its character, recognizing the fault, making sure they're transparent about the issue, and reacting very, very quickly. And to do so also requires, to mitigate that risk, that you become aware of that risk practically in real time, because social, one of the things about the risks from social is that they can propagate very quickly, right? The velocity of this risk is probably the highest of the other forms of communication risks that exist out there. It's global, it spreads like wildfire, and so the quicker you can catch it and recognize it, the better off your organization is going to be.
You actually, that's a perfect segue into our kind of penultimate question. And if no matter what you do, and in actual fact, there, as you rightly point out, there's numerous processes and frameworks and tools that you can put into place to make sure that you reduce the amount of potential crises that occur. But as we all know, sometimes it will happen regardless. And coming over to you, Lisa, I mean, in terms of training and procedures or processes that one can put in place to make sure that your team can consistently react and ensure that this issue is dealt with quickly and efficiently. I mean, what are the kind of steps that one can take to make sure if it does go wrong, you can react as quickly and effectively as possible?
Yeah, and I think overall, when we look to these types of situations that occur, and thankfully, knock on wood, there have been very few in my tenure at Amica, but we have an overall kind of crisis communications plan in place, and when and if a situation occurs, we always leverage that. So we ensure that we're looking at the situation, we're getting the right people involved with regard to whatever it might be, whether it's a claim, whether it's a coverage issue, whether it's something completely unrelated, and ensuring we're having conversations with those folks to get a full understanding of what the situation is, so that we can work together with our PR teams and other folks to develop a response plan. And it really is kind of leveraging the overall plans that organizations have in ensuring that you can manage through a crisis. And again, it could be really anything. We've as an organization, we have business continuity plans, business resilience plans. We've had exercises to see how we handle those things, and all of that kind of tests our response, and social's involved in all of it. So I do think that understanding the workflows and understanding the plans that are in place at organizations is crucial in being able to quickly and swiftly address anything that might be occurring. And again, I feel like I sound a little bit like a broken record, but it is a lot about communications. When we work with our business partners, we make sure, and we introduce them to the things that we're doing on social, we make sure that they understand if we're reaching out to them for something, we need it back quickly. This is a public forum, it's online, it can escalate very quickly. So they know that if something comes over from us, that it's kind of drop everything, take a look at it, let's figure out what's going on. So I do think there's a big communication factor in that as well.
As you rightly pointed out, having that plan, easing the communications, but also running through perhaps kind of scenario-based examples. So when it does happen for real, everyone kind of knows where they need to be and knows what they need to do. As our final question, Laurie, I'm going to come to you. And unfortunately, we're just rapidly running out of time, which is such a shame. Again, this could go on for a lot longer. But Laurie, do you see any big changes on the horizon when it comes to social media compliance and risk management, and any kind of big changes perhaps that you do see? What does that mean for your company and for many companies out there?
Yeah, I think that in the financial industry, it's safe to assume that there could be more consumer regulations on the horizon, or other security issues, or other things that are going to be security issues that would impact everyone. But so I think we're going to see certainly more of that. But we'll also see more people engaging through social and mobile as their primary channel of communication. So in a lot of ways, It's going to maybe impact the business model in terms of channels where customer service is offered to customers, or consumer complaints are managed. And I also think that just creates greater opportunity in really positive ways. So more people engaging through social and mobile is a great thing. And managing the changing regulatory environment will be obviously would have some impact in our world.
Fantastic, thanks, Roy. And finally, Rohit, I mean, in terms of any big changes that you perhaps predict, if you're going to get your prediction hat on, and then a couple of tips that you might recommend in terms of dealing with those with this change.
The only prediction I'd make is that change is a constant. So we will try to keep up with it as new regulations come, and certainly financial services has led the way as it has in the past in many other areas. But it's certainly something that the regulations social are coming up in healthcare, and through the basic FTC guidelines, it's really applicable to a broad range of organizations. So, what I would recommend is certainly, look into your social practices, be ready to make sure your social policies are up to date and allow you to, essentially be up to speed on the regulations that are going to impact you.
Fantastic. And Lisa, I know you wanted to just quickly pitch in at the end there as well.
And I think the only thing I wanted to add is that I think one of the things that we'll see is that organizations will use social to leverage leverage social to monitor risk management more, and see the value of social and keeping a pulse of the organization and what the risks of the brand is. I mean, again, I think that's truly one of the big benefits of social is that it does allow that opportunity for kind of proactive risk management. So thanks.
And I think that's a lovely way to end, actually, rather than on the kind of positive note of obviously the opportunities that social media provides in many different aspects, risk management being one of them. Thank you again to all our speakers for their insight and then, of course, their great answers. And really what's been nice about today's discussion are the differing perspectives, not only of our speakers, but also the numerous different people getting involved through the chat box as well. Unfortunately, given the time, it is now the end of our questions and the end of today's webinar. I know we've gone over slightly, as can often happen when we're talking about something as interesting and important as we have done. Apologies if I was unable to get round to your question. We did have quite a few coming through, but we've had some fantastic engagement and interaction with the discussion and loads of questions flying in. So thank you all for that, and of course getting involved in the polls as well. I'd like to thank our speakers again for their involvement, so Laurie, Rohit and Lisa, for of course their insight and their contributions. And before everyone leaves to get a well-deserved coffee, we will be sending out the recording of the webinar next week, so no worries if you perhaps missed any part of the discussion. What's more, if you still have a question and you would like to ask any of our speakers in person, they will indeed be speaking alongside 40 other leading corporate executives in the social space at the 6th Annual Corporate Social Media Summit New York on the 15th and 16th of June. You can see on your screen now some of the brands that will be speaking and sharing their best practice on the summit. And also, I'll just send through a link to the summit website in the comment field as well. So please do check out the full speaker lineup and the comprehensive agenda as well. Thank you once again for everyone for joining us, and thank you again to our speakers. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Bye-bye.